come and just say, hey, could you have some people for a 2-hour stretch with your promotion posters and answer questions and things like that? This kind of
Starting our work session. Matt and Phil, we are starting our work session. We've got a big agenda tonight. I want to get started. We're starting 7:19, 7:20. Our first topic is the attendance area development discussion. So there's a couple things associated here. We've got the presentation. This week, I actually sent a modified version of the deck out to board members. I think it was Sunday morning. And I'm not sure I copied Ken. So this is an older version. I would ask, and the request was to condense that presentation to make it a little more easy to use in our community discussions. I don't know if board members have a chance to look at that yet. I invite feedback. I don't think it's perfect, but I think as we start using it, we will refine as we go through some of these initial conversations, and it'll get better over time. Paul had sent some good comments I thought around maybe we should take out some of the school district's E's around superintendent directions. That's not really English for most of our community members, so we can change some of that. That was a good point of feedback. I'm happy to make that change. But I would ask directors to take a look, send me feedback, and we'll continue to refine, hone, make it more palatable for taking out to the public. Our first opportunity is at the joint entities meeting next Monday. Remind me who's attending that? Sean and JP. Sean and JP. I'd like to go too, and if that's as a third member, and then we can get the feedback from that first round and start making changes.
I did go through what you sent, the somewhat abbreviated version.
It's
Still
tough.
quite a few slides, right? But as I looked through it, I looked through it through the lens of what I would say to go along with the slides, and I think with that in mind, you could zip through 10 slides with making just a few comments to go along with it, because I think the gist of it is we are trying to do something and we're going to need help to do it. There's really good reasons why we're trying to do it, and then we can move forward with it. So here's what we think are the reasons for it, and we're asking for your help. And that's the very short, condensed version. We have all these slides, but I think the slides are just there as kind of backup to the conversation. I think that's going to be the important part. So in the end, I don't know that it matters how long the presentation is. I do worry about some of the various places where you go to talk to, where A, he may not have the ability to have a presentation, but B, I think you really need to tailor every single one to the target audience there.
Completely agree.
With the same baseline of, we're doing something important and we need your help. But we're going to need your help to do this, and we're going to need your help to do that, and your help to do this, because everybody's going to have something different that we're going to be looking for from them. And maybe they could say, well, we can help with something that we weren't even thinking of too. So I think we have to be very conscious of who the audience is, and every single time we try and go out there.
I completely agree, and having that ask in hand that's contextually relevant to the group that we're talking to, I think is super important. So whoever of us are going to leading these presentations, we need to have that homework done. I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, Sean. We have to be very mindful of the audience and what we're asking for.
I'll just say it again. I've said this before, but I think those presentations okay to talk about what we're doing, but I don't think it's going to be as effective unless you have something to show people. So if we decide we're going to pair school or we're going to redraw boundaries, like that's, at least we have that to take out and say, this is what we're thinking we want to do, this is why we want to do it, as opposed to, this is what we want to do, okay, how are you going to do it? We don't know yet.
But we do have in there the options that we're considering, which includes paired schools, magnet schools, re-boundarying, rezoning the elementaries, the voluntary transfer changes. I mean, so we talk about the options that are under consideration. There is a slide on that.
Yeah.
We just don't have specifics yet. But that's part of this engagement process, is to begin getting input from community members, community groups. You know, what is resonating, what's not, what concerns, what ideas people have. So. I hear you, we're just not at that point of having specific options yet.
And that's why I'm just wondering if we're at the point to go out and say, here's all these things we want to do, now you tell us which ones you like. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's just, I don't know. I'm for it, try it out, see how it works, but I'm just.
I guess I would go with it from, like, just full honesty in what we're doing is trying to concurrently get support behind the idea while we are also tangibly working on boundaries, right?
Right.
Because I do think that you can't lead with, here's what the boundaries are.
No, I'm not saying,
Right,
say, here's the
because then
boundary. I say it's, here's what we're thinking about doing. You know, this is why we think it's good. Maybe it should be changed. You know,
Right.
something you don't like about this, or something that you can tweak to it. But I think as a parent, not involved in school politics, school board issues, if I'm a member of the Noon Optimist and you come to me with this presentation, I'm just going to be like, so what are you going to do? You know, like, what's your plan? And I'm not really going to be invested until you show me what that plan is.
So my thought would be that when you go to that, you would have in mind what you want them to do. So if it's the optimist, what is it that we want them to do to help us in this process?
Right, so we went through that whole list of all those people last time of what do we want the optimists to do?
Well, I would
What
say,
do we want the joint entities to do besides, you know, like what is it?
I mean,
Because
you
you're
want me
gonna
to
talk to
answer
them.
specifically?
Well, I mean, that's what you said. You just said we're going to tailor to everybody. So when Sean and JP go to talk to the joint entities, what are they going to ask them to do?
You know, my first take is, you know, to me, this round of stuff is selling the rationale. And so I want everybody behind the rationale. Because you know when the maps are there, we'll get the input. We'll have more input than we you know, we'll be overwhelmed with input. But that input, I think, is going to be very specific about this plan or that plan. Right now, I just want people to understand this is why, the why of it. Here's our scenario. This is the district we live in right now. Because probably, unless you're looking at, you know, most people probably know their school real well. I mean, if you're not involved in school, you have no idea that we have a really segregated school district. My guess is that's really news to a whole lot of people, that we have one of the most segregated school districts, certainly in the state of Iowa, and that college towns in general tend to be some of the most segregated communities in the country. And my guess is right now that's really new information for a lot of people. They don't know that there's schools within 1 or 2 miles of each other that look like they're in totally different cities, communities, right? And so to me, that's kind of what's going on here, is this is the why we're doing this. Because I think we have to do some of that. I mean, the Hoover parents, you know, the email we got this week and the folks who spoke tonight, I mean, that's legitimate concern. I mean, that's like...
Yeah, but what do they want?
They want to know, but we can't tell them that because we don't know.
Right.
But what I want them to understand is this is why. And this is why you may be disrupted again, right? And it is a bigger picture than your kid in school right now. This is about, I think Sean said, the precedent, you know, what kind of community do we want to live in? Do we want it?
No, I'm not disagreeing. I mean,
I
think you and I can speak to it the best because we ran a whole campaign against each other on a single subject almost.
Right.
And that subject was balance in schools. And I just think that our community as a whole, I think people know that we talk about this. We talk it to death, we just never do anything. So I'm just worried we're going to keep talking. I mean, I feel like we're going to do something, but I feel like we're going out just to talk some more. I just want it to be focused. And so I'm not saying it's all bad. I just want it to be focused and like for it to be meaningful to people that we're going to talk to and like behind it, you know.
So maybe this is the first of multiple conversations in this group. This first one is the case for change, getting the buy-in, understanding why this is, you know, someone in the earlier meeting said some of the moral imperative. Was it Lisa or, you know, so we sort of feel moral imperative in a way to do right by our students and ensure that everyone has an equitable environment in this school district so they can all achieve. So get the case for change, get that buy-in. Here are the options that we're considering. We're on this concurrent path. We're considering the options. We're looking at maps. We're looking at different options. We'll come back to you once we've got something more concrete, but we're beginning to engage you in the process now as we're starting and bring you along as we progress through this work. I worry that if we wait and then come out and unfold with maps, and we haven't done some of this initial engagement, then we'll get yelled at for not engaging people early too. I'm with you. We have to commit to do something. If we're gonna go through this process, we have to not just talk. Because people are sick of it. I've heard that feedback too, we've all heard it. But I don't think there's harm in beginning having these conversations and then continue the conversation. If we say it's a one and done, that's not gonna cut it.
Would it be helpful to kind of talk about, not just, here's all the options we're considering, but we know that it's going to take multiple options to get to the end game, and what we're targeting first is a boundary discussion because it can be put into place faster than some of the, like, we have options, they're not really I mean, they're all things that we are potentially going to use to reach the end game, but it's not all of our options that are up in the air for immediate use in 2019, right? So I don't know if that's sort of bridging the gap between specifics and generic ideas, but at least this is a stepwise path we're looking. I don't know if that speaks to a little bit of what Paul's asking for. I know it's not
And as
specific.
I think about what an ask would be for them, like for the optimists, for example, I would like them to understand what we're doing so that when the whole community erupts, they can be ambassadors of our message. This is why they're doing it. I mean, these are people that aren't necessarily hooked into our circles. They may be retired, they might have grandkids, but not that they're all old. But they might not be people that are, like JD said, aware of what the current issues are. So informing them of the issues, and hopefully then when we do come out with the specifics, they can say, hey, we heard a session on this, and this is why they're doing it. Think of it this way, instead of, man, I hate that word, they're always changing things on us.
I guess what I've seen happen in the past is things have been tried, we've put maps out, and this piece of it has really never, the needle has never moved. It always sounds good in the beginning, socioeconomic balance is good, and then somewhere along the line it gets totally thrown away because usually neighborhood schools wins, and I mean that was my experience in 9-10, is in the beginning this was a great idea, but then as the maps came out, everybody was like, forget it. Like that became the last thing. And I think if we're going to push through, because we'll see that again, I mean that's going to be the argument is, well, this takes me away from the school I may be closest to or what I'm used to. And I haven't seen boards in the past be able to get over that hump, that they've always sort of given in to that argument. And so for me, this paves the way for our argument. So at least, and even if people disagree, I want them to understand why. If you disagree with why we're doing it and you don't believe that you think segregated schools are okay with you, and I'm not saying because that's, I mean, it's not my opinion, but if that's your opinion and maybe you have good reasons for that, let's just put resources at it or whatever. We can have a disagreement of opinion, but I want you to understand our message, and I don't want it to be misconstrued or painted in this different lens. And I think, one of the things that I think is important from that angle is even the board, how quickly we right away went to focusing on the negatives. This is fixing problems, right? And then the advice we got, which I think is good advice, is focus on the strengths. This is a positive thing. And I know that's helped me talk about this issue. It's helped me think about the issue of like, oh, actually, we're trying, it's not like we're trying to solve, there's a problem here, we need to fix it. We're trying to take this really positive thing we have in our community that not every community is blessed with, diversity, and make sure that it's equitable across the district and help frame the argument. And so, my guess is, Paul, that just time, logistics, my guess is we're not going to get in front of too many groups, just from a purely logistical standpoint. Certainly we're not going to get in front of them before we have some specific, we're not going to get in front of all of them before we have specifics, because we want that train to move quickly as well. We want to so I think it's going to be a little bit of both. That there's gonna be some groups who get in front of, I think joint entities is a good one to get in front of with the why, because it's kind of a philosophical thing. You know, most of our communities, what I've heard kind of politically from the county level and in the city levels is affordable housing is a concern. And so to talk about, well, here's the district's role in this, and here's why we think we want to see, you know, more equitable distribution of whatever, housing or educational resources. Because then those are the leaders, the real community leaders that now that's in the back of their head. My guess would be that our conversations around the table helped the city of Iowa City come up with, include us in their annexation, in their language. Right? And I think that's what getting in front of joint entities is going to do, is send the message to the cities like, hey, this is where we're going. This is the train we're on. This is where we're going. We want you on board the train. And the truth is, if more people understand the why, I hope they'll get engaged in the process. So when we sent the email that came this week, I think part of my response was, we don't know because we want your input. We're not going to show you what we're doing because we haven't heard from you and your name. You know, we want everybody's input around this idea of equity in our schools. And so it's a little. I think the professional term is janky. You know, we're just kind of going in little fits and starts. We don't have a complete package.
I think it's okay. I think we're going to learn through it. We are keeping the parallel path and doing the detailed work and looking at the options and stuff. I mean, I feel like we just need to start putting our toe in the water and start having these conversations and keeping up these work sessions.
Just move on.
No, it's fair. It's a good discussion.
The only other thing that, sorry, I wanted to change, I think you should change is before the the next step slide, the process timeline, where it says that we want to be implemented and effective for fall of 19. I don't know that that's necessarily realistic to sort of go out and promise it. I don't know that that's something we want to be saying. That might be a goal.
This is a goal. It's a goal.
Right, but the way it reads is
Right.
we want to have it implemented effectively for fall of 2019.
Well, that's why we have that process timeline the way it is that's kind of like drop dead date, if we're gonna make a change for fall of 19.
No, all I'm saying is if you show that slide, and I'm sitting in the audience reading it,
Mhm.
and I'm not listening to Sean because I'm just reading the slide,
Yeah.
it just says to me, we're going to implement this for the fall of 19.
Let me take a look and see how goal, it's a target goal.
And I'm sorry, can we get a full list of the groups that have been reached out to?
So, yeah, I actually sent that to Janet. So I haven't heard back from the board members of their results from checking out to, or checking with other groups.
Okay.
But I can send to everybody the list
Yeah.
that we listed at the last board meeting. It's also in the minutes from the last work session. Many of the groups, yeah, they were all in the minutes. Kristen listed them out. It didn't say who was going to do what, but, and I mean, if you'd like to discuss it, I was wondering, I have the list here. I can tell you what I know from the groups that I've talked to. The Center for Worker Justice, they can't schedule until Mazahir is back in the country, so that's not going to be scheduled until August. The Iowa City Chamber Board, Iowa City Area Chamber Board, that's already scheduled, hasn't been sent out yet. The Iowa City Porterville Convention and Visitors Bureau has already been scheduled, again, hasn't been sent out yet. The Neighborhood Centers of Johnson County, that's in process. I'm actually meeting with them tomorrow to get the specific communities sorted out and to figure out where and when to meet with the different communities that they have family support workers working with. Do you guys want the specific dates on the ones that I listed that are scheduled?
Let's just email it,
Okay.
yeah. And I think if Lori sent this afternoon, the other ones, I think, Sean, you got your stuff scheduled, it looks like with joint entities, the Optimist, Portable, North Liberty, and then there was some, I think, JP, you were working on Kiwanis, Equity.
Yeah, I had emails out to Anita to get a hold of Kiwanis and to Ray to
Yeah.
talk to IC there.
Yeah, and then Equity, I think?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So.
I mean, I won't give a presentation, but I'll bring it up.
Yeah, and to have it on your agenda for next, yeah, perfect. So then another was DPO, which we're trying to go to the DPO schedule, I guess. Phil was gonna talk to the Sunrise Optimists. I don't know if you've got an update on that, Phil?
I haven't been playing phone tag, haven't connected.
Okay. And then I think, Steve, you were gonna follow the Rotaries.
I didn't have that on my list, but I can do that.
I'm sorry, I put you down for that because you
All right.
have their calendars.
I'll get to work on that.
Have you reached out to the Johnson County Board?
You're like,
And I'm like, wait a minute.
We have not, but,
I am happy to do that.
okay. And I also thought another group that should be added is the Black Voices
Yeah.
group.
is there someone who wants to take that as a?
I'll do both.
Okay, thanks.
Is it-
You know.
I mean, Phil, do you still attend those, or?
Well, I try. I've had some conflicts. They met yesterday. And I had a playground committee, and then I stayed to listen in on the safety committee. So it's typically on Mondays before we have a board meeting, and sometimes that's a hard night to make.
Yeah, I can do both.
Thank you.
The one thing I was going to say real quick, going back to what Paul said, it doesn't hurt to go into every one of these, not only thinking about the target audience, but what is the ask of that specific group. I think starting with the joint entities is kind of a softball, right? Because I think they get it, right? They know that we are a segregated community. And, you know, we did bring it up already at the last joint entity, so they're at least primed for it, and there was good discussion. And I think the ask for them is to perhaps give us more context or more ideas to, you know, form the rest of our conversations around, or things that we should be talking to, or even other groups that we should be, you know, seeking input from, and things like that, and just kind of asking for that help from them. That might be the ask from those guys, because I think it's giving a presentation to them is, in my head, is more like, hey, here's what we're going to tell some of these other groups, because they may not be as aware of, you know, the way the situation is as that specific group probably already is. But I think it's important for them to see it and kind of see where we're heading and can help out. It sounded like they were all wanting to help at the last joint entities, right? And we're hopeful that we are going to be successful, so it'd be good to.
So we've got a couple sessions before our next work session on the 24th, the joint entities and Affordable Optimists, which is on the 23rd. And so we'll have some feedback from those two. We can decide how we want to make some changes. We have some other ideas for groups that we want to reach out to. We can bring those to that discussion as well. And it's just going to be a fluid, constantly growing, evolving, you know, we'll think of new groups along the way. So I think we've got to start in place. I'll make the edits that Paul suggested, get a new version out to everyone. Can this time?
That's great.
And then if there are other edits people want to see, just send them to me, and we'll get the deck in its place for next Monday. Help me understand, because I missed the last work session, what the Appendix 5 piece was all about. I know we've got 26 or however many criteria in Appendix 5, and some of them are sort of conflicting, and we experienced this last round. So what was the exercise that we voted on to prioritize, and what are we going to do with that?
I can pull it up. The request was for Kristen to just send out a quick, using that Qualtrics tool to send out a quick request for board members to prioritize their thinking around those multiple areas that are in Appendix 5 and share their thoughts on preferences for consideration as we move forward and look at changing attendance areas.
So
I think the idea was, if we're going to be asking admin to be putting together maps and stuff, this was to help guide some of those initial maps and giving some context of it. You know, what are we going to be thinking about as we're trying to put those maps together? I think that was the
Things that are
reason
more important,
behind it.
things that are less important.
okay, was the goal though to change Appendix 5?
No,
Okay.
no.
It's just that some of them are competing
Yeah, I agree.
priorities, so it was.
Actually, I thought there was some nice alignment from board members on?
Yeah, especially me and you.
I know, great minds, right?
Sean and I had the same exact ones, so.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, it was funny, but like, 4 of us have ensure equity and educational opportunities for all students is number 1. I mean, so I think, and that shows up on someone else's too, so I mean, I think.
And I'll say, I'm the one person that didn't list that, and it's because I assumed that that was the whole reason we're doing this. I had it listed as number 1, and then I thought, well, that's why we're doing
That's
this.
so obvious. Why
So
does it have to be-
I'm gonna not use one of my votes.
That's good. So is there anything else we need to do with this piece of data?
I think one interesting note is that balanced socioeconomic demographics was on every single person.
Yeah.
You hit somewhere.
Yeah, that's good. So that shows lots of alignment. Yeah, I think it's really good.
And, you know, data is on 4 out of 6, but I think that I questioned if I would put that, because I'm like, well, yeah, we're using data. And there were a couple of them on that I prioritized, but I'm like, well, it's a given, so I think there's a lot of them.
Yeah, that's good. So anything else on this particular item? All right, moving on to elementary 1 to 3 mile driving distance data and maps.
So I'll just give you a real quick overview so you know what you're looking at. So what we have out there, and Adam's not here, so I'll thank him in absentia. But I think you know from the last couple of meetings, we've been struggling working with the software and have part of that figured out now. So what you see in each one of these areas, and actually let me pick a better one that you can see a little bit easier. Let's grab. So on this, what you see is here's Borlaug Elementary School. In the area that's kind of this tan color are those roads that are within 0 to 1 mile driving distance. The yellow is the 1 to 2 mile driving distance, and the brown is the 2 to 3 mile driving distance. We use that just because we also did this in case you wanted to know at some point in the future. We did it for junior highs and high schools too, although I know that's not part of your conversation right now. But that's why we looked at 3 mile, and so we just did it for all the schools in the district. Even though, remember at the elementary, when we look at walking distance, we're really talking about this tan colored area and the yellow colored area here. So for those of you who haven't looked at these kind of maps before, they look kind of odd. And the reason is, and this is a great example, you can drive up this street here and you can turn down here, or you can turn down here and still be within a mile of school. As soon as you go past that, now you're in the 1 to 2 mile area. So that's why you see some of these funny areas. Why can't you get to the median strip on the highway? Well, there's no roads there. But it's really pretty detailed when it goes through and does this. Like you'll see this area here. This is going to be more than 3 miles. So if you're ever looking at a map and you see a gap like this, because you can come through this direction and get here and be under 3 miles, you can come through from this way and get there and be with under 3 miles. But you can't get to this particular road segment without being over 3 miles. So that's just a quick overview of what all of the maps look like. We did pin the rest of the schools to that, so you can see which other schools. Here's Coralville Central in that 3 mile range. Weber's outside that. Horn's outside that. Kirkwood just inside that here. So that gives you some perspective. And again, all the maps follow the exact same process as you look through it. So those are the maps. The data that you have, the table here, we pulled as much demographic information as we could. So looking at Alexander here, that's the 0 to 1, 1 to 2, tells you how many students live within that area. And then we did 0 to 2, so this would be your walking distance. And again, this is by roadway, so this would comply with state law and district policy. And then this shows you the demographics for each of those distance bands, the 0 to 1, the donut, and the 1 to 2, and then the full walking in the 0 to 2 mile total.
What I thought would have been interesting, and I'm sorry I didn't really get into this until last night and today, but capacity, I mean, I could find that, but school capacity on the same chart would have been kind of interesting to see.
We
Or
were
the same
working on
data.
that. Yep.
Because for me, I actually sort of like this idea of walkable schools, or neighborhood schools. We in some ways are violating that with voluntary transfer policy. And so if there's a way to take a look at, what is within the 2 mile radius of each of our elementaries, recognizing we've got capacity constraints and recognizing that we've got overlaps too between some elementaries that are 2 mile radius. Some could be in one and some kids could go to another. But if that became kind of a guiding design principle, that we're going to look at neighborhood schools, voluntary transfer modifications potentially, and then what would that look like in the boundary discussion? I think that might be one very concrete way to begin looking at boundaries.
Sure.
With
Capacity is a pretty easy one for us to add. We can do that. And Adam and I had actually, we couldn't figure out a way to do the overlay. The
Yeah.
map wouldn't allow us to do that. And
But that's
then,
what's interesting, was you could see there's gonna be students that could go.
but we started looking
in
at that,
different
right?
schools.
We could see that down at dual monitors, just when you pull it up and you look at it and you see where those things look like they overlap and you can zoom in. So you're right, there are quite a few areas. I know in the past, when we've been sitting at the table here, we use Garner and Penn as an example, just because the two schools are within half a mile of each other, so there's a lot of overlap there. And what we were trying to figure out was whether or not you could put an algorithm in there that would send kids to schools based on any kind of tagging. We were struggling to make that happen, but at the same time, we can look at more aggregate numbers, and if there are overlap, we can look at assignments. We wanted to see if we could do an if-then kind of thing, and we were kind of struggling to make that work for groups of students, because you wouldn't want to send this student this way and the student next door that way.
That's right.
You want to take the whole neighborhood. So,
Logical
so we were playing around with software on that, but I think there's some opportunity for us to look at those areas that overlap. And from a guiding standpoint, as I look at your chart, are you looking at the idea that a neighborhood is a walkable neighborhood? And so that's the area that's within 2 miles, and if that's one of the guiding principles for us as we draw maps, that gives us a pretty good place to start, because there'd be areas in the district then that would be in a school. It might be might only qualify for one, or it might qualify to be in 2 or more, and so then you'd have to go through that assignment process. And then you'd have some students that are going to be outside of 2 miles of any school. So regardless of where they go to school, those students will be transported to a school. And then we were talking about the assignment process that you could use with those students, try to get them to the closest school, fill up empty seats, look at demographic information, or whatever process you want to use for assignment. So there's some hierarchical algorithmic thinking process that you can use to start doing assignments like that, if that's something that the board winds up being interested in.
I just have a couple comments, I guess. Looking at the data chart, a couple of the specific schools just kind of jump out as what are you going to do with it, right? And so if you go all the way down to the bottom, right, you see Wood there, and the 0 to 1 and the 0 to 2 miles, there's no change, right? It's over 70% below SES, and there's 1,000 kids in that number at that 0 to 2 miles, so.
That would overlap with another school in that 2 miles.
Well, the thing, because it's not changing, it's 70 and 71 from 1 to 2 miles, you have to be pumping in a lot of kids from elsewhere and pumping out a lot of kids, or very deliberately grabbing small neighborhoods and moving them out and leaving behind very small pockets. And that's going to be a problem on, and you kind of look at some of the other ones that are on the other end, Wickham from the 0 to 1 and the 0 to 2. There's change for sure, because it goes from 3% to 13, but when you're capping out at 13 with 783 kids there, that's still a problem number. A lot of the other ones you do see, so if you look at Twain, for example, difference of 71 down to 58, that's a significant change from 1 to 2 miles. And so it at least on the surface there, says, okay, maybe there's something you can do there. But some of the other ones are, I don't know what you would do with those maps.
Maybe candidates for pairing discussions.
And I can tell you from past experience that in the area around Wood, Twain, in particular, that's a really densely populated portion of our community, and it's very hard to draw attendance areas without significantly gerrymandering the attendance areas in order to try to get that kind of balance. It's very, very difficult to do that. We've, the last few rounds, that's been something that we've tried to do, and it's almost impossible. I remember, I think it was 2 or 3 times ago when we went through it, some of you might have been there, we drew the stripes to see what the stripes looked like horizontally and vertically, and that was about the only way we could get balance, was to literally draw a north to south stripe and draw a series of stripes on the east side of the river, and that was about the only way to get that balance. We tried east-west stripes, that didn't work. We tried gerrymandering, that didn't work. We literally had to draw a top to bottom stripe on there, it didn't work. So you're right, Sean, that will be a challenge for us. And even in Twain, if you look at the 0 to 1, you've got 412 kids there. So you think about the capacity of the building, if you were to try to get that kind of balance, you would have to send some of the students who are closer to Twain away from Twain in order to try to get that balance there. And I think that's something that we need to have that conversation about, because we know people like to go to the school that's closest to their house. So we can add the, Janet, we can add the capacity numbers on here. That's a pretty simple, straightforward thing to do. I'll get that done, and we'll get this sent back out to you as board so that you have access to it. We can get that posted out here so people can see that too.
Can I just speak a lot again?
Please.
I think we honestly need to start looking at what we want to do, because I feel like I've looked at these things so many times now. We haven't decided to do anything. When we get to the paired discussion, there might be 1 or 2 schools in there that I think, hey, if we start here, and then we try and work and figure it out. Even, okay, so I'm just going to jump into, if we paired Twain and Longfellow, for example. Great for Twain and Longfellow.
Can we just move on? And,
I'm not ready to move on yet, but I'd like to hear what
Okay.
Chris is saying.
So it's great for those 2 schools, it works, right? What do we do with Hillswood and Alexander? Same area, similar areas, similar attendance zone draws. So like, until we decide we're going to try something and actually not just moving some lines around to make some shifts, then I think we're just going to keep talking it and talking it. Like, we need to start talking about, like, let's go down this route. If we're going to go the paired route, we use the Hanover research that we have, and there's a checklist in there. Like, do we go through that whole checklist? Do we meet the criteria for that? Like, I think that's the discussion that we need to start moving, because I think all of us are in agreement that we need to do something, but we're not doing anything. We're just talking it. So I think we need to start, like, putting some ideas down and, like, really looking at it. Like, that's 0 to 1 to 2 mile radius might be part of it, but, like, let's start making some movements, I guess, is what I'm going. So, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I was gonna piggyback on that. I'm with you, Paul. I'm ready to go ahead and get some maps out. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, that I liked the building block concept that we used before, where we had a defined neighborhood, and we said if we move that in here, you know, what does that do? Does everybody know what I'm talking about when I say that? I liked that concept because it made it very simple to keep the neighborhoods together, to avoid the gerrymandering, to avoid the breaking up the neighborhoods. But getting that significant, because one thing that's important to me is that when we move a group of students, we don't want to move just one street. We don't want to move, you know, a street halfway down the street if it's clearly one street. I mean, we need to move a mass of students so that it's not just, 10 kids pulled out because they happen to be the EFRL kids. And I know that we're not doing that, but if we have the appearance of doing that, that is not going to further our
But it could go the other way. We take the affluent students, those 10, and move them to another school. It could go both ways.
Right, but I would like it to be a group.
Yeah, I do. That's
Instead of-
thought thing makes a ton of
Like
sense.
some sort of significant mass, and I don't know if that's 30 students or what it is, but,
But if it's
So-
10 students that make the difference, then I mean, that's okay too. I mean,
I guess
we're talking in
what I-
circles again, but.
What I'm hearing is not, like if you have a development, say, I don't wanna tear apart the development. You know, it's a neighborhood. And that's what I've heard people say too, like, I don't necessarily care where my kid goes to school, but I want them to go to school with the kids that they live next to. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the school closest to that neighborhood. If those kids are together, they can go a little further, I'll be fine with that, but I want them to be, you know, certainly, like, yeah, dividing down the middle of the street, unless it's, you know, the interstate or a significant traffic where maybe there's not a lot of crossover, it divides the two different neighborhoods, so.
And do we have these building blocks defined from the past process?
Yeah, it was attached to a work session maybe 2 times ago, and we can attach it again, but we had the building blocks that were defined then. We could start with that. I know Steve was concerned that those weren't the current numbers, so I wasn't sure if you wanted to use that 2016 data. But I hate to have you do it all again, because part of it's just a conceptual thinking of it, like, okay, so what does this building block look like? And I hate to have him have to like do it all over if we're not gonna move it and we're not serious about it. We just wanna know, so we know whether this is, you know, you follow what I'm saying? Trying not to make us worse.
I think before we even get to that point, though, we need to discuss the other big things that we're talking about in here. If we're going to do a paired school, we need
Yeah,
to
I was
discuss.
just gonna ask, and again, I'm gonna jump ahead too, but if we look at Twain and Longfellow and say, you know what, the best thing that's gonna make this work is to pair them, then working on boundaries seems like the stopgap and not the solution. And do you just say, you know what, let's see what work it takes to pair those, right? If it becomes what the majority's opinion is as the inevitable thing to do, is to pair certain schools, then maybe, I will admit it, it was kind of my idea that we do the short, medium, and long term, and the short term was the boundaries, the mediums potentially pair schools, but maybe it's still not gonna happen as fast as boundaries would, but that doesn't say, okay, let's talk about that after we do boundaries.
But part of the paired school might also be boundaries. I mean, there might be some boundary changes incorporated that could go ahead and be implemented.
I agree, because I think when you look at Corville, if you're talking Kirkwood and Wickham, it doesn't make sense on the secondary level, but what if there's a boundary change that involves Cornwall Central and Kirkwood and Wickham or Boardwalk, whoever, and then you pair a school, right? But until we decide that we want to look at paired schools and what those schools are gonna be, we're just creating boundaries off building blocks that.
I mean, honestly, I think we're gonna have to do, I don't think we're gonna get to where we wanna go without pairing some schools. I don't think we're gonna get where we wanna go without some magnets. And I'm willing for that to be a long-term discussion. But I don't know that we can, I'm with you, Paul, I think we need to talk about pairing and we need to say this is a part of it. And that's also something that's gonna take getting used to. You know, people are very unfamiliar with it.
I mean, I had a very brief discussion with Amy about it on the phone, you know. Is there excitement? Is there talk amongst the staff? She's talked to some of the staff, and like, but to have those conversations with, we might do this, as opposed to, hey, we're really looking at this, let's get your feedback.
Because we have limited other options. If we're serious about balancing the schools, we're probably gonna, in the neighborhoods that Steve's mentioned already, we're gonna have to look at some different options besides just boundaries. Can we decide tonight? It's on the table, let's do it.
I'd like the idea
Well, let's just,
here.
yeah, let's get to so if we're moving on to the next topic, because I have some issues with the way that well, with the data that's on here, honestly, because we looked at 2017, 2018 boundaries, but we actually do have 2019 boundaries, which changed certain schools like Man and Longfellow's population significantly, but I don't know what that looks like, because it's the old data.
Hang on, you've moved on to, sorry.
I pulled up the paired
Paired
school
school,
thing.
okay.
Yeah, you're right, we use the 17-18 boundaries rather than the 18-19, or rather than the 19-20 boundaries. And
Because you know what it is, and the other one will be based off of what is now.
right, and because I'm not sure those are the boundaries you want. I mean, in all honesty,
But-
right?
Yeah,
So
but I guess
these
that
are ones
is the
I know.
boundaries until we
Yeah.
change them.
Right.
But I'm not sure, I wasn't sure those were the schools you were planning on pairing, or if the current schools were the ones you were planning on pairing. So I went with what I know. This is what I know.
And we didn't give you a specific directive on that, so in all fairness, we could have probably clarified
Yeah,
that.
I mean, it should be, but when you look at Longfellow, Man, and Lincoln specifically, they're going to change because New Hoover's opening and Old Hoover is closing, so they have different populations. Like,
Which one you want to look at?
there is no Hoover now.
I've thought about this, even not just paired schools, but even with some of the other numbers and the maps and things that, you know, there's approved, voted on boundary there. I mean, there are boundaries for 2019, and if we're going to even take building blocks and start looking at changing boundaries, it should be from the currently approved for
Because the Hoover
2019.
folks think they're going to a certain school
That's
in
exactly
19.
right. Yeah.
And if we say that doesn't exist, then they don't have a school to go to.
Yeah. If we take this year's boundaries, it's, okay, all you people at this school, you're not going there, right?
So if we
It's not
take those boundaries, can we talk about what, I mean, because it sounds as though we're all in agreement of exploring paired schools. Can we then talk about, even though I know we don't have the exact numbers, I mean, but based on what we think make more sense, are we still thinking that, well, Twain and Longfellow will make sense, or that's not even a conversation we can have until we have those boundaries? Because what I don't want to have happen is we send the administrative team off to collect more data, and then we have to come back without at least a framework of looking at the one idea that we think we want to move forward with.
So I'll tell you what we can do, and then maybe that'll help you. So we already have all of these kids that live in our district pin mapped. So they're already affixed in our geographical information system. We also have the 1920 boundaries defined at a granular level in our system, because we have to do that because that's part of the attendance area lookup process. You're new to town, you plug your address in, we need that to be incredibly accurate when people plug that in. So we've got that at a granular level. Some of these other ones, the maps aren't necessarily, we haven't said, is this the street or is this the backyard? We haven't gone quite to that level of detail. But with the 1920 maps, we have that. So we could give you this information for what Longfellow would look like in 1920 with today's kids. Keep in mind, we're going to have two cohorts of kids that are going to move through there. Numbers are going to change. The number of kids might change at a grade level. Demographic tags may change to some degree over that time. But you would at least have a look at what would that attendance area for, we've got Longfellow up there, what would that attendance area look like in 1920 with today's kids in it, imagining that that's, you know, the agreed upon attendance area. So we could, and then tag for you all those demographic characteristics so you could see that. So you would know what Longfellow looks like at that point in time, and in this, for instance, what Twain looks like at that point in time. And then you would be able to see those numbers. Because keep in mind, Longfellow is going to change because it's losing the eastern part of its attendance area, and so we already know that that's going to be in flux to some degree. So the numbers won't look like this if we're actually looking at using the 1920 boundaries. We could do that for you. That one is a relatively straightforward one for us.
I think that would be more helpful, because even if you're looking at the kids that live there now, I would
Yep.
assume that the neighborhoods, say.
Fairly stable over 2 years.
Yeah. They're not gonna, you're not gonna tear down a whole bunch of houses and build $1 million houses and right next to City High all of a sudden.
So is this what we're gonna do for our next work session? Is it possible to that
Oh, yeah.
for
2 weeks, we can
Longfellow
definitely do
and Twain, this view?
By next Wednesday or next Tuesday, we can find.
I feel like we need to pick up the pace. We had talked about having meeting, actually, what I'd like to do is change our cadence to, so that we have fresh work sessions where we're not coming after a meeting. And so, you heard me say it already, I'd like to meet next week and then, do our work session either 2 weeks after that, or if we have an ask that we can get right away, then do that next work session on July 24th, or whatever date it is. But I'd
How
like
many
to-
pairings
I'd like
do
to
you
pick up
want?
the pace.
I'm
Twain Longfellow, sounds like.
yeah. I want to make sure that I don't overpromise. So part of it is I need to know what the scope of the work is that you need done for next.
Say shoot, yeah.
I think we need to see what the numbers are on the individual schools again.
Okay. Yep.
To then say, okay, those two look like they belong together, because,
You want to see,
you know, pairing, I mean, I probably can go back and find all the numbers that we
you want
had
to see a
back in
chart
the
that
day,
looks
but.
like this,
Yeah.
right? That
Right.
has the 1920 number
Right.
on it.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right.
Because that may very well change what I think now is a good pair. I mean, I don't think it's,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's still
Yeah.
a couple that are probably going to be similar, but I don't know if they're all the same, so it's hard to tell you which ones to.
The biggest danger we run into, I'll be perfectly honest with you, is, and you saw it happen today, is there were documents that were uploading. I mean, Adam and I were uploading stuff over the weekend, we were uploading stuff yesterday, we were uploading stuff today, which I know for you is a challenge and something we've had a long conversation about, is you like to have time to look at the documentation ahead of time. I can almost guarantee you 100%, there's no way we'll have this ready to go if we have a work session on Tuesday and you want us to upload the agenda tomorrow afternoon. This will not be ready when we upload it. It may not be ready by the end of the week. So
And
this may be
that's-
something that,
If we're pulling this on you, then we understand that. But if we did have a work session next week, one thing we could do is look at those 2016 building blocks that you have already done.
yeah, I would caution that those, if you are projecting forward to 19, you're looking at a 4-year gap there in the data. So those are probably going to be off by a factor.
Yeah, they wouldn't be completely accurate.
Maybe a suggestion would be, I think we all feel pretty comfortable that 20 to Longfellow make sense.
Based
somewhat.
on what we
Yes.
think, yes.
So, what if we started with those two, went back to this literature that's been out there that we haven't really talked about, brought in Amy, maybe some other people, some of the principals there, and just started discussing that. Those two schools, maybe we go through this checklist and make sure that that stuff's all there. And we start small instead of saying, here's 9 schools we want to pair. You know, we start with 2 and just have that
And learn from
real,
it.
yes, discussion about it.
I'm good with that. It feels concrete and very specific, and something that we could get our arms around. I think perhaps maybe for the next work session on the 24th. Gives us a chance to, I know, well, we're not gonna have the data in time.
If it's just one school though, or one pairing.
But we want to also be respectful of the principal's time, and if we're gonna have a serious conversation, we have to invite them, and I don't know if that's fair, getting on the horn tomorrow, hey, Tuesday night, forget whatever you have planned. I mean, I understand your,
Yeah.
I
So if there's something
understand.
else we can talk about next Tuesday, I'm good, but I do feel like the 24th is the proper time to have this more detailed discussion around, again, sorry, where did it come from, Longfellow and Twain, to get the right people to participate. So if there's something else we can talk about next Tuesday. I'm not opposed to a work session next Tuesday. I just want to make sure we've got the proper time.
Well, we can talk about everybody else then. If we think that they're gonna be paired, then we're gonna do one pair to start with. We can talk about what are we gonna do with the rest of the district.
But what do we need the numbers that he was just talking about from 19, 20?
Well, and
I mean,
that's where I say, we can ask him to do that work again. It's a lot of work. So it's like a 60-page document that we had building blocks for. So I know it's not up-to-date data, but it gives us an idea of,
I think it'd be good to see what the building blocks are, so everybody knows what that means, that it's this.
They're the ones that were attached to the, I just had it up, sorry, I just clicked to a different screen. It was the May 22nd work session. 22nd.
And maybe what we can do, and even, you know, put that, just upload that to a new session, and just for us, that we're thinking about what those building blocks are. And then as we're out in our community or put our head to it, then we know, we have that, we know what the building blocks are, we have general areas of town or neighborhoods.
We need a work session to do that?
No, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
just for us to educate ourselves, so we know what they look like. Paul's absolutely right, you know, if we're gonna pair, that's way more than numbers on a page. It's gonna be staff, it's gonna be principals, it's gonna be neighborhoods, it's gonna involve boundaries. There's gonna be some boundary shifting with any paired school. I doubt it will work just clapping those exact boundaries together. So I think this is a part of us just kind of having a discussion as we move along, but that's a very concrete thing, and then that's something to work on. And I
then
think,
when we define the building blocks, we could say, instead of giving us 60 pages of building blocks, Steve, give us 3, give us, these are the ones
these
we really
areas,
want.
this neighborhood, this,
It's item 10 on that board work session. It's listed as March 27, 2016, board supporting documents.
so you said March?
March 27,
That's the
2016,
name of the
board supporting documents. That's the title of it.
Okay.
It's
still
number
May
10
20.
under attendance area discussion on the May 22nd
Okay.
agenda.
We had an awful lot of documents.
May 22, go to there,
22.
go to B,
B,
go to 10.
10, thank you.
Bingo.
This document, which is all about paired schools, that was prepared for us in 2014.
Has that been attached recently to the work session?
Yes,
agenda?
it's in the February 13th work session. There's also information on there about magnet schools and year-round schools,
Yeah.
but if we're gonna talk, make sure you at least read this. Good.
Yeah. I'm still struggling with what we're gonna accomplish next Tuesday. If we're gonna come back together, I want to be very concrete and specific about what our goals are for that discussion. So I'm still not quite clear on what we're doing next Tuesday. We're gonna look at building blocks, and what are we gonna talk about?
What building blocks we would potentially want to see moved.
Are we ready for,
We would need to see the 2019
Yeah.
map as it is planned, and then we would need to see,
You want the demographics that go with the map.
right.
Yeah.
And then we would say, okay, this is what we've got for 2019. Now, what would we like from Steve as a building block? And if, one benefit of doing this is that we don't give him 10 asks at the same time. He's working on the pair school, he has 2 weeks to do that. We get this old data, we look at it, we give him a different ask, he's got 2 weeks to do that. It's a little bit different.
Can we have the discussion of kind of working backwards on a timeline of actually implementing a paired school? Because we started that with the boundaries, so here's the drop dead timeline to do that, and we work back. I think it behooves us to say, all right, we're jumping in paired schools. Let's figure out that timeline.
I would suggest if you're talking about the 2019-20 boundaries, and you're talking about pairings using the 2019-20 boundaries, you would want to start with no earlier than the 2019 school year. But then I think the thing that you need to think about with that is, if you don't go with the 2019 school year, and we talk about, I know one of the things on your chart was student transitions. So we are going to change attendance areas in 19. And if we're not prepared to do pairing in 19, and I'm not saying this is good or bad, I just want you to make sure that you're thinking about it, or as you said while you're up talking to people, if you're going to pair after that, if you were to do it right away in 2020, those students could potentially be in 3 schools in 3 years. May not be a good idea, so you may want to think about, if we can't pair in 19-20, are we looking at 21? I'm not saying yes or no, I'm just saying these are things that you want to make sure you think about as you're having conversations with people out there. So,
I know, I definitely lean to it. Going to boundaries in 19, that's why I think we haven't been talking about the 19 boundaries, because in my head, I don't want to do 19 boundaries and then in 20 have different boundaries. I mean, I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think that's going to be positive. I don't think that's good for kids.
It's not good for teachers, it's not good for.
It's like that, I want to rip the Band-Aid off fast.
I'm going to put another challenge out there for you then. We're going to have 2 new schools in 2019. I need to send someone there. So I need some changes to the attendance areas for 2019, or I'm going to have 2 empty elementary schools.
Which is why I think it makes sense to start with that map, because there's a school that's closing, and there's 2
2 schools that are opening.
And we've already got kids,
Zone there,
assigned.
right.
so we can't, I mean, it'd be a lot of work to redo all that.
Absolutely.
And I do think that there are some tweaks that can be made to those boundaries that could make a big, big difference.
The 19 ones.
The 2019 boundaries.
Are we still on the parent elementary school discussion topic? Because if so, I'd just like to hear from Amy about kind of what we talked about or what you're hearing, since there's,
I'm talking about paired.
yeah.
Yeah, so I happen to be meeting just in a regular meeting cycle with clusters of elementary principals, and I had gotten through most of them, so I was into 4 different cluster meetings. By the time I had made my last step, you guys were having more of a conversation about what those possibilities could be. And as we circled to the paired school discussion, with this particular group of elementary principals, there was a lot of excitement around it, I think. Just the possibilities, some of them were sitting in our particular smaller elementary buildings, and so for their staff to have access to other teachers teaching at the same grade level caused a lot of excitement. I think too that we have had a K-6 elementary system for a long time, and so to think about even just reinvigorating and how exciting it would be to have our building attendance centers look a little bit different was just, for that group that day, pretty exciting.
That's cool.
That's great. Because I think paired schooling gets us a lot of operational efficiencies, certainly demographic balance, but at the end of the day, if it's better educationally, and sometimes just getting excited about something and having is huge benefit. I mean, anybody in education, certainly, especially if they hear about it in May, it's a good time. But, so that's great to hear. And it's concrete, it's something that people can learn about, ourselves included, and because we have the Hanover data and we have the checklist, I think we have some places to start. And we've got a few, and Steve, you said which schools. I mean, if we start with Twain and Longfellow, but I think in the back of the head, if you're coming up, have some other ideas where specifically maybe it's small schools, where we're going to get some of that educational benefit. Then I worry less about community backlash because it's got this, these educational justification. And so I'd like to get from you too, kind of where that looks good. Because we had this time, I think it was nice to see Mann and both Lincoln and Shimmick. I think that's nice to kind of compare those two. And are there other places? I mean, North Liberty would be super easy to pair a bunch of schools because they're so close. Now they're larger, so you don't get it's not, you don't get that same thing. But the other thing I got frankly pretty excited about was the staffing efficiencies. Mm-hmm. Those are big numbers. That's a lot of money. And we're coming up on some years when Craig's and me yelling at us pretty hard when we're down to 1% unspent balance. And we're going to be hearing about it all the time, about the 84% staffing that we can't. It's so hard to get into that, but that's a way we can do it. And now you're talking 10 teachers is how much money? And that's ongoing savings.
Right.
One thing I'm curious
If
about
you're-
is,
Only if you're letting those 10 teachers go, as opposed to reassigning them.
Well, eventually you would though. You wouldn't let the people go. You'd let the position. Through attrition, you're going to gain.
Right, but it's not going to be 10 at once, probably. You know what I'm saying?
No,
Over time, we will gain operational efficiencies, and we just leave it at that, and then.
Yeah.
Or you lower class size.
Yeah.
so.
Right, but you're keeping the teachers there.
Well, one thing that,
The cost.
just one caveat to that, just remember, and we didn't run this, but when you start pairing, you're likely to have some transportation inefficiencies, because you'll have some kids that would have been within 2 miles of this school that may not be within 2 miles of that school. That's a shot in the dark. No idea what that would look like.
I think
So
we just have to
there'll be
live
some
with that
balance to it.
uncertainty.
Right.
I just want to put the caveat out there that it's not going to all be savings.
Yeah,
There'll be
Well,
some
right,
additional costs.
and
that
there
go
will,
along.
will undoubtedly be some facility cost with
There could very well be,
modifying
yep.
that way.
Having enough kindergartens.
But it's over time, when you figure it over time, if this is something that we commit to, you're looking at it long term, so.
And facilities and busing over teacher cost is, I'll take that.
Okay, I want to make sure we're on track for next Tuesday. We're looking at the 1920.
So I will meet with Adam, I just emailed him, I will meet with him first thing in the morning and find out what the ability is to get all of the 1920 data for you. And then with capacity numbers, I have that note in there too.
Okay.
And then I will get that email out to you right away, make sure that that's something that we can produce for next Tuesday.
So that would be reviewed. The other thing we could do is look at that Hanover checklist
Yeah.
and start
Like I
familiarizing
say,
ourselves
just
with that.
put this on there as a
Yep.
discussion, and then also, that could be the time that we come up with the questions for Amy and her team, like, you know, or Craig or
And
whoever, like.
If you've
does
reviewed the
Longfellow
building
have to
blocks,
be
if
the
you've got some
3-6?
building block
Yeah.
numbers that you want to
exactly.
get to us, then we can build those out for you and get the same kind of demographic information and some maps that go along with that.
And I think Sean's idea of what's the time scale look like?
But I feel like we just really took a left turn in that it was boundaries paired, and then now it's kind of flip-flopped. And quite honestly, I don't know.
I think we're working off of 19 boundaries.
Well, I think that's, yeah, I think
So
that's
we have
a key
boundaries.
start, but I think we
Do it the
need
other
to
way
at
and
least
tell me how
have-
you're gonna do it. I guess that's,
What's that?
Then we're drawing boundaries to change them parents.
Yeah,
Like
see,
we have
I'm
boundaries.
resonating with where kids go to
Well,
school
yeah,
in three different places. in
I
3
totally
years, and
see
we can't do that.
if the idea of trying out a paired, whether it's at 2 or we try it in a couple places, whatever it is, if that gives you bigger bang for your buck, if you will, and it works to coincide with the boundaries that are already drawn for 2019, like that's an easier pill to swallow, then that's a timeline we should be really trying to
Right.
attack then and
Right.
align those things and stop with the very global boundary discussion. I agree there may be some tweaks that could make pairing better, but it's changing where our conversation has gone and going. And I'm thinking, okay, next Monday I'm supposed to walk into the joint entities and tell them what we're talking about, and
But it doesn't change the why.
it doesn't change the why. But I think having some context is important.
And we can even share, we're starting serious discussions on pairing in these 2 schools.
I mean, when we look at the number, now that's not the 1920 data, but the numbers on those pairings, you've got Kirkwood, Wickham, okay, done. I mean, boom, it's there, the numbers, right? And I know that's just on paper, and that's not everything in Hanover, and that stuff is super important. I'm not gonna pretend that if it looks good on paper, it's gonna be all bright and sunny in the real world, but, wow, there's some areas, some of our areas, Wood, Alexander, are tough to make a dent in with
Yes.
anything.
Yeah.
But some of our really high need areas aren't very hard to make a dent in. It's relatively, they're there, they're close together, and folks with drastically different incomes don't live very far apart from one another in certain parts. So I think if we can get there with, combination of pairing and then some building blocks and tweaks here and there.
So we've got 3 topics for next Tuesday. What time do we want to meet?
Early.
One caveat, I completely forgot about this, I just want to make sure I mention this, Kim was just reminding me, I was wondering why you were trying to get my attention. We cannot meet here next Tuesday because there's a 3-day professional development here, Monday through Wednesday. So we have to meet off-site, which is fine, we've got plenty of time to figure that out. I would suggest we're probably at a secondary school for parking, although there's not a huge audience here, we could probably do an elementary school, but
They're staffed with custodians in the summer.
yeah, we could probably move one of the day subs in there if we needed to. So secondary would be best for us. A lot of our custodians are moving in shifts right now to clean in the elementary schools. So the elementaries are sometimes problematic about whether the staff's actually assigned there for the day. So secondary would be easy because I know there's going to be people assigned there.
And so this idea was for early, how early?
Well, I was thinking, since it's by itself, right?
Mhm.
And we're not gonna have
Start at
anything else.
5?
If we could, I'll meet at any time, but, if we could get it early.
5:30 is better for me.
5,
If
okay,
you all want to
sure.
start at 5,
I can't.
just work stuff that I can't change.
You guys will just have to start without me.
What time would you
Make it
prefer?
I'm in Cedar Rapids in an all-day strategic planning thing, and I'm done at 5. I think the earliest I could probably be here is 6. I don't mind starting without me and then joining. at
No,
6.
6 is still starting sooner
Yeah,
than
it's our
8
standard time
o'clock,
anyway,
that's
so.
right.
So So 6?
6.
Sorry, my schedule's crappy, I apologize.
No, it's no problem.
We'll probably aim for a medium-sized space, think like City High Commons, ability to project, room for people to be able to see that, for you to gather as a board.
Okay.
So we'll see what's available and get something out. So sorry I interrupted there, I just don't want to lose that train of
So
thought.
6 PM, and we've got 1920 data, we'll look at the Hanover checklist and start formulating questions around the pairing issues, questions, things we need to consider, and then do things we can get scheduled. And I think
And Steve's gonna add in the building block data,
the
the old data,
which we already have,
so that we don't.
With the idea that if there are blocks that you would like us to look at specifically, in relation to the new 1920 maps, then we can carve those out for you and bring you that data back a subsequent
Did
session.
you catch that, Kim?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so we're good for next Tuesday. What's next on our agenda tonight? And again, what's when we moved to the new RAM model data, what was this, where did this come from? I don't know, context for this item.
I don't remember what the context for the item was. I know there was a request for, what was it? What
Oh,
was
having a 4th layer.
Well, yeah, but that would be not no RAM, that would, the discussion would be more like we have 4 layers versus 3.
With ring, right? I
Yeah.
thought that's where that came, I thought that was the ask.
Right, but to not have, that was not to say to not have RAM, it was just to add another.
I think there was a question about what class sizes would have looked like without it. I'm trying to rewind the meeting in my
We're not
memory.
saying we're not going to do RAM anymore.
No, I think there was just the question was about, well, what would the buildings have looked like had RAM not been in place? So that was a pretty straightforward data run for you.
Well, and also,
Discuss this?
and I vaguely recall there was a question of that if the FRL numbers and ELL and special ed all decrease, then there wouldn't be a need for as much RAM,
Yeah.
and we would see how many teacher savings there would
So
be.
just as an FYI for you, and maybe if nothing else, this will be one of those meetings that you'll want to remember, make a note in your file, because we may have to come back and pull it up at some point later, and we won't have to remember that it's the May 22nd meeting. But our net cost right now for running RAM last year was 28 teachers. So, and keep in mind that that is due in part, as you were pointing out earlier, to that economic segregation. And if you looked at some of those paired schoolings, remember I was running, and I bring this up because JP was talking about the cost savings in there. So if you have schools that are better balanced and don't wind up in that tier 1 level, obviously you're going to have a change in class sizes there, and that's going to result in a differential in the staffing process. So if you think about from a cost standpoint, that's a couple $1 million right there.
That's zero
Every year.
Every year.
And what I didn't do, and I apologize, I think Phil, you might have asked this question, we actually struggled to figure out how to codify it, but the question was, what would the operational savings be if RAM wasn't in place? And we had a hard time figuring out how to quantify that, but obviously there would be a need for 28 fewer classrooms throughout the district. If you think about that, that's either 2 of our smaller schools or 1 of our larger schools. So if nothing else, the exercise provided us some context.
That's good.
So we know the cost of RAM from a staffing standpoint, and we have some context for the operational cost.
I think it was part of it, the conversation was very interwoven. Janet, you had asked early on, can we have capacity listed on that chart? Well, capacity is different if you're using a RAM model or not a RAM model, so I think it was sort of to try and get an idea. If you then balance everything and it's not a RAM, then the capacity is different. So how do you really work those bets? Because as you change your boundary, the capacity might change.
Yeah.
And then you might have to change the boundary again, and the capacity will change.
Yeah.
So I think it was somewhere in that conversation of, well, what does it look like without RAM?
The capacity numbers that Dwayne has given us, though, are not RAM numbers.
No,
They're just
the ones that we'll
capacity.
use for you are as if there was no differentiation in class sizes. So that'll help you understand what the capacity would be if there was no RAM.
Okay, anything else on that one?
I'm wondering if we could flip-flop the next 2 items. We have a band instructor that came specifically for that discussion item, for the transportation for performance music.
See.
See. Oh, got it, yes, of course.
Can we do that? Is that all right? Yep. So here's some handouts. This is Mr. Rady. He is a band instructor.
Hello.
And a great one at that. And he and I were having a discussion this weekend, and we discovered that the data that is on the website for, have a seat, for the after-school band and orchestra for Alexander and Kirkwood is misleading. So this is the assignments.
Yeah. So give them some background as to why it appeared on the agenda to begin with, or do they know that? So.
Oh, because we were concerned about transportation for Kirkwood kids, because right now they can just walk to after-school band and orchestra. If they're at North Central Junior High, we were concerned that we would need to help provide some transportation to fifth and sixth grade kids to get to North Central, and likewise with Alexander.
Yeah. So if you, on the sheet on the website, if you look at it, it's put there. So the reason it came up is because a parent looked at it and said, "Oh, it looks like my kid from Alexander is going to be asked to go to Northwest," but it's not. That's not the case. So what's on the website is simply put there from a HR perspective and not from a parent perspective. And so what I did, I just printed out something that this is what is actually happening. This is what we are actually doing. Here, I don't need them.
No, that's all right, I just want to make sure you got them.
Those are where our kids, so those are the schools that are assigned to what band and where they're going. So they're grouped very geographically. And so Alexander is going to Southeast, and Kirkwood is going to Northwest for band. So no one is traveling very far at all. And in some cases they're walking, which we love. So I think, and Amber Oline, who is another elementary band teacher.
I didn't realize
Yes.
that. Seriously, on
yeah.
the table.
She has kids that walk over from Van Allen just right to
Yeah.
North
And
Central.
some walk from Garner, but not many.
Yeah. So
So it's not an issue?
it's not an issue.
So it's not an issue.
Yeah.
Good.
That's great.
Need more things like this on the agenda that are an issue.
So are you, I'm just trying to figure, so would it be helpful to have this information on whatever website that parent found? Is that?
It may be. I looked for the one that you mentioned. I couldn't find it today. I don't know where it is.
Couldn't find it either.
Okay.
I'll send it to you. I tried to email it to you, but the link wouldn't.
Thank you. Get it to go.
Oh,
Well,
So-
I couldn't find it either.
Karen,
so-
Karen
this is
located
what
it
it is.
earlier.
Wherever, I don't know where it is, but
But do we know where it's
That may be an
at?
issue.
You know,
if
I'll
people
find it
can't
right
find
now
it.
and email it to all of you.
If it's wrong, maybe it's because they
Well,
can't find it.
that's
Well,
Again,
what-
There you go.
that is out there accessible to families.
That's an easy one
Are
to
we
fix.
saying that this should be there instead, and that's something just for our HR group?
Yeah, we can.
this is still helpful. This is what is on the website is 100% correct. It's just that if when you're looking at it, if you're not sure what you're looking at, you can come to the wrong conclusion of where your kid is supposed to go to band.
Okay.
So if that makes any sense. And looking at it, I completely understand where they got the feeling that their kid needs to go somewhere else. But the thing is that there's two components to what we do, and the kids don't necessarily follow where the teacher is. And
This
so,
is the dual enrollment page, so it's under the homeschool assistance
Oh.
program.
Yep.
That's
Oh.
why.
And I'll email it to you all
Yeah.
right now.
So, right, so this is gonna be helpful for the homeschool assistance program. This is gonna be helpful for our 5-6 kids in our,
So what's the specific action item, Steve?
well, this needs to stay on the homeschool assistance program piece, so we'll find some place to put this.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you, thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah,
That
appreciate
was
it.
really helpful.
Alrighty, we'll move to Superintendent Director 3JC.
Six.
I see, sorry, did I say C, 6, whatever. 3J6. I just had my eyes tested today, clearly there was a good move on our part, I got today. What are we doing with this? I missed the discussion with them last week at our last meeting, I don't know what the context is of this.
There was discussion about whether or not demographics were the appropriate mechanism to do RAM assignments, and whether or not, from a weighting standpoint, if there were other criteria, in particular, were there proficiency opportunities for us. And we had a long discussion about how difficult that would be, because are you looking at third grade kids only in reading, or are you looking at every grade level in reading and math? So I went back to Amy and Diane and said, hey, which was the directive, by the way, was to go back to Amy and Diane and say, hey, what other options are out there? I did some brainstorming, and the two that we have on the list here, which I'll pull up for you here, I'm looking at them here for you, were to look at either a state or a federal accountability. And so the two that, and I'm going to drop to the chart at the bottom of that memo. So one is the Every Student Succeeds Act Accountability Decision Matrix. So this is our federal one. And then if I jump back up to the top here, this is the Iowa School Report Card. So these are both measures that the state uses in one instance and the federal government uses in another instance to classify our schools. So they have some tags for them, some names that go along with them. And our discussion was that these may be a little bit more holistic than a single assessment score. So proficiency, so now I'm on the one at the top, which is the Iowa School Report Card. You can see, you can see, you can see proficiency is on there. The work that's being done to close the achievement gap, assessments for college and career readiness, annual expected growth measures, graduation rates, attendance, staff retention, et cetera, et cetera. So there are multiple measures that are used to assess each school. Under the ESSA accountability, you've got the number of kids that are actually participating in the state assessments, their proficiency rate, their graduation rate, their proficiency on their primary language, the average scale scores for them, their post-secondary readiness, which looks a lot like a college and career readiness score. So both of these provide multiple measures for assessing each school in the district, then provide us with a rating for that school. This is something that could be used in place of simply demographics for any given school in the district as a way to do RAM weightings.
So do we already have this school rating based on?
We have the state information, we'll have the Fed information next year. They're just rolling this process out. If you remember, there was a ESSA gap year. They passed it and they kind of left us in limbo for a year while they developed the implementation process for it. So they're just ramping that up right now.
We'll have those designations in October, actually.
Right. They did it last year, and now they're doing the data crunching, and they'll give us our report in October.
So that's something I think we should talk about at that point. And if we want to maybe shift totally from looking at demographics to something that includes proficiency and some of this other stuff.
Maybe it doesn't have to be a shift, but an inclusion.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But what Amy had said, and tell me if I misunderstood Amy, but in order for you to change the RAM assignments, or I'm sorry, the classroom assignments for this coming year to something that had more alignment with proficiency numbers, that you felt like you needed to be able to have a policy that you could stand by.
Yeah,
So that when you get the angry parent calling, we can speak to that.
Yeah, so if you go back 2 board meetings ago, that would have been the first one in June. We were sharing the staffing and enrollment and what it was, the landscape was looking like. There was a May 21st release of that for principals. We posted that in board docs. At the same time, people were requested, or somebody had requested if they could, you guys could have access to the FAST data broken down by the RAM schools. So that evening, as I was presenting that information, Lori said to me, what happens when a building or a particular grade level hits that aspirational class size? Well, in the last couple of years, we've been automatically awarding that new FTE back to that particular situation. So the example that was used was Lincoln Elementary. What happens when they go over in grades 3, 6, 30, we hit 31, and that allocation goes right back to Lincoln. And Lori said, what if you knew that you had access to that FTE and then took it back somewhere else in the district to a building, to a particular grade level where that proficiency wasn't as good? Well, trying to figure out a standardized way to make that all work is a little bit tricky. And then the second thing about that is if we were to want to reallocate our FTE that way, at what point are we gonna stay, there has to be some sort of threshold, right? Are we willing to go to 32, or are we willing to go to 34? And that evening, I was also trying to make the case that, in my opinion, at the elementary level, it's really hard for me to try to look across our landscape at any one of our classrooms and see more than 30 students sitting in a classroom. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that exact example that Laura used. Of course, we could see a situation where maybe it's one of our middle tier buildings where they are allocated, I think at 24 and 28, K2 and 3-6. So maybe we're talking about one of their buildings. That particular grade level is really well intact and doing well proficiency-wise and behavior-wise. Are we talking about reallocating that at E2? Who gets the allocation? Where are we supposed to look? So when I then wasn't at the last board meeting, Steve came back to Diane and I said, what would you look at? You know, would it be a single academic point in time that we would look at? And interestingly enough, Diane and I both came up with these two different ideas, but pretty similar. You know, Iowa State Report Card is based out of legislation that happened a couple of years ago. And then, of course, as accountability is in line with what you would have seen in No Child Left Behind and building designations. So those are just some initial thoughts we had.
If you only looked at proficiency without looking at mobility, you could say, let's just take Hills. Their second grade class scores in 1 year were not proficient. So you're adding to the third grade, but the third grade may not be the same group of kids. So
Right.
maybe
That was where we got to last board meeting when we were sitting in here, was who are we talking about and how do we measure it? Is it just literacy? Is it literacy and math? Is it the kids last year as they move into next year? And that's where, when I went back and we started talking about that winds up being like a Rubik's Cube to try to figure that out. And probably reaches a level of complexity that we don't have the ability to make the movements as quickly as we need to in order to make them work. I mean, Amy and I we're looking at numbers as we move through the spring every single Friday. We're pulling numbers and we're looking at them to try to get staff in the right place because we want to make those staff assignments. We prefer, in an ideal world, to make 100% of the staff assignments before we leave for the end of the school year. That gives the principals and the teachers the opportunity to make sure that they're doing the roll-ups, they got the right number of sections next year, we've got the kids properly allocated, and they're ready to go. The longer that it takes us to move people around, the more complex it is at each of the buildings that has to deal with it. And if we're looking at those kind of measures, now we're looking at last year's second grade kids in math, they're moving to third grade this year. That means I'm going to take this teacher out and I'm going to move them somewhere else, but I got to move them to the same grade level that's got the lowest math proficiency in the district last year. As those kids move from second to third grade, we're not going to be quick enough to make that kind of assignment. We're just simply not going to do it.
And I think that's why this works, to the extent that it works well. The RAM model is it's based on the building.
Right.
And principals know, oh yeah, that particular class has this group of kids that is going to need the support in fourth grade next year.
And that's why we give them the latitude to come back to us and make us a pitch that I'd prefer to have that teacher in second grade rather than third grade because this is the makeup of that class and this is the needs that they have. So they have some individual latitude. That goes back to the question Lori and I were going back and forth today about the numbers that were, we used the formula numbers instead of the actual numbers when we were calculating the differential between the RAM and the no RAM model. We just plugged the formula in, so we didn't have any of those idiosyncrasies in there. But these two measures do capture proficiency. So there is a proficiency measure in there as opposed to the demographic data, which obviously has no proficiency data in there whatsoever. So that's why when Amy and Diane and I had the conversation, they're not perfect measures, but they do provide a different window than just demographics.
It'd be interesting to compare though, and see how using one of these two, ESSA or Iowa report card versus demographics,
We could work on that.
does the tiering look any different?
Yeah, we could work on that.
I like the things that are listed, and I'm just looking at the Iowa school report card because that's the one we have now. And it's got a lot of things really that pertain to the things we're trying to change.
It's also got, it also feels heavily skewed. Some of the items are skewed obviously to middle and high school, so.
They are.
Right, and so
They are.
this wouldn't be, well, that would be a different consideration.
And then college and career learning growth, college and career learning.
They do,
growth,
they do have
special
some, they're using a methodology to measure it at the elementary
learning.
level.
College and career learning growth,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, Avid is.
Yeah.
we're doing that.
What if we did this? What if we put together, knowing that we're not gonna have the ESSA data till October, what if we reframe the RAM data so that we can bring you 3 sheets after the certified enrollment? So after your cert enrollment date in October, we can bring you one that says, this is what the RAM numbers look like with our demographic only data. And maybe one that says, here's what it looks like with the ESSA data, and here's what it looks like with the Iowa State Report Card data. Gives you an opportunity to look at the differential between the 3.
yeah.
If you want to use some combination or only one of those categories of indicators, you'd have the ability to do that. We've got enough lead time, we can set that up so once the indicators come in, we can plug them in, it should be pretty straightforward.
So this would be for a board discussion item?
We'd bring that back to you in October. We do cert enrollment for October 1st. The state's getting better. I shouldn't say that, should I? The state's getting better at their data cleanup. In the past, it's taken them as long as a month to get the data cleaned up. They're getting much, much quicker at it. So I would hope that by that second work session in October, we'd have that information for you.
So I know there are some teachers that get added at the last minute, or even after school has started, because I've seen that happen. I guess what I'm wondering is, as you make those decisions, I hate to wait till October to have this piece added in.
How would that look in just a fair application? I'm just really trying to figure out what that would look like.
So would you prefer it be either or, like the demographics or state report card or ESSA?
I think we need to have a larger discussion, because I'm just gonna move towards ESSA real fast. You're gonna have a universal, comprehensive, or targeted list of schools. But to fall in that comprehensive, I predict we're gonna see a lot of schools, even outside of what we typically would see Title I, because to get to our targeted, to get to that targeted label, you have to simply have one subgroup underperforming. And so I think the conversation will need to become, do we take those 3 categories and shift them directly to these 3 tiers that we used to have over in RAM? Or are you willing to say these 2 equate to 26 and 30 allocations, and that top one is only going to move to what we saw with our RAMS 1 schools? You know, that's the kind of conversation. And just a little caveat to you guys, Iowa has had to go back a couple of times to the feds to get their plan approved. And I've seen 2 different iterations of this student accountability decision matrix, how it's broken down by weighting. So I'm not sure I've got the most recent or accurate one. I found 2 during the springtime. The other thing to note about that is those percentages and that accountability index are going to slightly change from year to year. And I don't know if there's going to be a point where it will stop changing, and that will be the different weightings. But for example, the reason I know that is this conditions for learning survey that we had to give for the first time this spring for ESSA purposes. We know that that's going to continue to ramp up over the next 3 years for how much a piece of that puzzle is going to be as an indicator. So for example, I think at the elementary level, where right now in year 1, you're going to see it given a 5% ranking, I think within 3 years, it's going to be as much as 19% of that.
So I think, it's going to be a discussion. I think what we're going to end up doing, if we want to adjust RAM, it's just going to make it a little more complicated. Because it's kind of like if you go back to No Child Left Behind, you could be a school in need of assistance. If you have 4 Native American students in your school, and one of them is not proficient, now you're at 75%. One subgroup, it doesn't matter how many people are in the subgroup. So some of those numbers, I mean, that's why No Child Left Behind was so awful, is because you're throwing, the data didn't make sense. And so I think I don't want to get to the place where RAM becomes this,
Every school's needing that.
because eventually some of those things get there where it's like, oh gosh, 2 kids aren't proficient, and now we're allocating 4 teachers. So I think it'll be good to have it, and I think then we'll take what we want from it, is my guess. But I think that's going to be a deeper discussion. Once we see the data, see how our schools are labeled, and then we'll know our schools best, and we might have better ideas about, wait a second, that doesn't make sense for that school, and then adjust RAM. To get more, I think using that data to inform RAM will be good, but I hope we won't go to like the just ESSA or even the Iowa report card, which is probably.
So maybe a formula.
Some kind of formula.
50% weighting of this, 50% weighting of that, or,
Something.
something like, would that be helpful?
Or we're still going with meeting in October with the,
That's when we'll get the ESSA data, and we'll have our certain enrollment data too, so we'll be able to push that all in. And you're right, there'll be a handful of teachers that we may wind up having to hire after the date. It's been, knock on wood, we've gotten really pretty good at this. Probably because we look at the numbers all the time. I think last year was 2 teachers after the start of the school year, so that number's pretty small.
fantastic. I think we're done, folks. Is there anything else for the good of the cause? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So,
So,
All in
we have the
favor?
agendas are set then?
Yeah, for next Tuesday,
think so.
6 o'clock, we'll find out the location.
For tomorrow, yep. 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 For tomorrow, yep.